How are adult relationships affected by early attachment? How does the way we were raised impact the way we raise our children? And can negative patterns be changed? Neuroscience educator and parenting coach Nathan Wallis is with us. He's part of a new documentary film, Seen, to be released next month, which explores the importance of personal healing for parents. Kia ora, Nathan. Good morning.
Kia ora, Catherine. How was your summer?
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. I hope yours was good too.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good.
I love this topic.
I love this topic, and I love the fact that there's hope. We know those early attachments, those early days, so important in life. But I know you're going to talk through what can happen later if need be. But first, just remind us the significance of early attachment and its lasting impact.
I mean, we've always known it was significant because you had theorists like Bowlby and stuff that showed us how important attachment was, a long time ago. But I think neuroscience then come in and we understood how the brain develops and that the human brain sort of basically designed, what does the literature say? It's designed to be moulded by the environment it encounters. So it means only 50% of your outcomes are set in your genes. Less than 30% of those are set when you're born and decided how they're going to be. So 70% of your genome is, in some way, shape or form taken on a transcript from the environment to decide whether those genes are actualised or whether they're not actualised. What all that means is that, the first 1,000 days, by the time you're around 2.5, 3, we can statistically predict most of your outcomes as an adult because that was the brain's data gathering period. So that's the early years stuff, is the quickest way that I can say it. But, just we're designed to adapt to the environment. And so
it's epigenetics, isn't it? Right down to the genetic level. It's epigenetics that determines whether a gene is turned on or not. And that can be physical environment, it can be food or chemicals or anything else.
It can be early care and relationships. We know that kids in orphanages, identical twins, so they're genetically the same. And one's at a good enough home, because it doesn't even have to be brilliant. Just the literature literally uses the term good enough parenting. So that child's receiving good enough parenting. And then the other child's in an orphanage somewhere, getting fed and changed, but not actually getting the love. Their brains do not develop in the same way. They develop radically differently.
It's love and connection. And do we still say
love
to a primary caregiver, particularly early on? Do we say still to a primary caregiver early on?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's that the humans, we call it the dyad, that two-way relationship. It doesn't have to be the mother, doesn't even have to be biologically related. Like the child, we understand attachment a whole lot more now, and the baby's basically designed to attach to whoever talks to them the most, because language is the key. We say language is the major driver of cognition, of how much you're going to think. So for 50% is genes and 50% is gathering information from the environment, the leading part of that data is your language from your primary caregiver.
The purpose of that early attachment, is it just a fundamental trust in another human being? And is that why it can cause so many problems later? Trust that someone is there for you.
Who's the famous theorist? Erickson, is it? That has trust versus untrust or non-trust, whatever. And that's that. He's got a pyramid of 7 different things, stages that everyone goes through in their life, and that's the first one: trust versus non-trust. And if you've got that, if you don't trust people at that fundamental level, then that changes the whole structure of your brain and your personality and stuff. That can be for the rest of your life, and most of the time is for the rest of your life. But that's the tricky thing with the brain; it's never set.
It's the plant. It's the seed planted for self-sabotage, isn't it?
You set a pathway, and if you don't do something to consciously change that pathway, then you will end up. That's why we can predict people's outcomes at 32 based on the data we've got from them at 3. Not because they're set at 3, but because most people stay on the path they were on at 3. But absolutely, you can change it.
We'll come to it. Obviously, one of the primary ways it rears itself, not only in your intimate relationships, but of course in your own parenting style. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think probably the most personal thing that we do. That's where we learnt, our parenting style from, even if we have consciously sort of rejected it and gone, no, I'm never going to sound like my mother or my father. In your weak moments, you hear your mother's voice come sailing out of your mouth. It's all in there. You might parent quite differently to your parents, but it's usually only one stage different, What's it like? I thought my eldest daughter is like 32 now. I thought I was doing wonders by putting her into time out, because I come from a generation where everyone said you should be smacking her. And I just inherently felt that was wrong, so I didn't want to do that. So, put her into time out. But I could still look back now and say, oh, God, I'd never put my grandchildren into time out. I have a conversation with them and I relate to them like a human being, not lock them in a cupboard. But so it's all comparative. I think they tend to change a little bit from your parents unless you address it and you unpack the stuff, and then there's a whole metamorphosis of change.
And look, modifications around exact sort of parenting practices are a different thing from from being unable to make that connection and be that person of trust and be that person of love for a child. So tell me a little bit about the documentary, and in this, do you explore how you can reset some of that very deeply embedded pattern?
To be honest, not as much as I would have wanted, because that's what I like to focus on. People don't want you have to explain why things went wrong, but they really want to know how to fix it. So it is in there, but I think it's more trying to be a wake-up call for people to understand that core message that you've already said so eloquently, Catherine, about what it's about, that if you need to unpack your own stuff and identify it, even though that's quite scary and hard sometimes, it ends up being easier than you think. But when you address that, the quality of your own relationships with your own children just goes, infinitely improves. You can jump straight to grandparent. Grandparents seem to enjoy a far higher quality relationship with their grandchildren than, the kids are always my kids, and I'm sure other people's adult children are saying, you weren't that nice to us when we were kids. You get better at it the second time. I think if you unpack that stuff, you can achieve that level of skill.
There's another aspect to that. I wonder if we could digress before we work through. The other thing about being a grandparent is you are not the primary caregiver to
That's
that,
right,
to
absolutely.
That
That's the gold of it.
And if things did not go well with your own attachment, is that a particular a vulnerability when you are a parent yourself? That being that primary person is the particular struggle.
It is, because we can just be the best of ourselves as grandparents. I think that's why, if I'm really blunt, grandparenting is like being a parent but with staff. Like someone else does all the work.
And breaks.
And you just get the good bits, and you get full night's sleep.
Pay.
And, it is really, but you still get this high-quality relationship because you've raised children, the understanding, better what works, and you're not trying to shape them because it's their parents' job. You're just being in relationship with them. And ironically, you end up shaping them often more than the parents do because that's what children respond to.
You're less vulnerable. Also, you're a less vulnerable relationship than the parent. Let's talk about ways to address whether it's someone you love or whether it's you yourself, and you know that this is part of your story.
Yeah.
When and how can you begin a process of changing that pattern, Nathan?
Yeah, I think some of it is normalising it, and hopefully that's what this movie doco does, is that everybody has issues from their parents, even when you had lovely parents.
That book, They F You Up?
Yeah. You of course you get wonderful parents and stuff, but you get wonderful parents that made sideways comments, about your weight or something, and now you're anorexic, and but they were still lovely people and didn't even know they were doing any harm. I don't think anyone's got perfect parents, so most people have some issues. Well, not all, but most people have some issues. So I think normalising it and taking the stigma out of, you had a really horrible childhood, and just, no, actually, it's not, most people had a really horrible childhood and a really lovely childhood and a really sort of in-between blood, you experience all childhoods. Everyone has joy and everyone has sadness. But, it's how you unpack that. So normalising it is one step. And that includes, normalising it in the conversation, so it's all right to talk about. We all sort of know that if you grew up and you were constantly being told that you're clumsy, and it's not surprised if you turn out clumsy, but it just goes far, far deeper than that. I don't want to brag and go on about the literature too much, but there's 4 attachment styles, and that most people get the secure style, and that gives you that base of all that stuff we were talking about previously, Catherine, with how your brain develops and what it's needed and what it's evolved to expect over hundreds of thousands or millions of years even, and that's all happens just in that relationship.
But what are the other styles?
The other styles, basically the really bad one at the other end of the spectrum is disorganised attachment. That's when your parent actually abuses you. So the person you are falling in love with and trust, you can't trust. So that's the worst one and the worst outcomes. But most of us fall into the middle 2 categories, which is avoidant, and the other one is anxious. So avoidant is typically when you have a parent that's a good parent, though. It might be on the PTA, they don't go to the pub or anything, they never leave you alone, they do all the things that on the surface you're supposed to do, but they don't seem to have an ability to actually connect with their baby and look in their eyes and fall in love with them, and almost could be a bit clinical. And so that has implications for how the child feels avoidant. The other one is anxious, where you might have a parent that knows how to connect with you, and you feel that sense of connection and that you're supposed to feel, but then they disappear. This often comes up with drug and alcohol use. The parent's there and sober and is able to provide that connection, but then disappears, and the kid's farmed out to 4 different babysitters over the weekend. And that gives you an anxious attachment style that says, I know how to be loved and I know how to love back, but I can't remain in that. So as an adult, that person might appear they're good at conversation, good at relationships, good at, doing that stuff, but not very good at it long term, because they ultimately don't know how to be in partnership all the time. They only know how to be in partnership when they turn that on, and then it turns off again, because that's how it was for the early attachment. The avoidant person, often just they hadn't avoided a caregiver that didn't really connect, often feels a sense of guilt because they don't know why they don't feel like other people, and why relationships often don't work for them and people don't seem to understand them, and they just feel this disconnect with people and like they're playing a slightly different game than everybody else.
So your first phase is perhaps to understand your own style, and I think a lot of people can, well, we've all got one, at least one. We can get to the point where we can understand it. The second thing is what you do to change it. I want to start with that most extreme disorganised attachment situation first, if you would. I remember talking to you once, it was very impactful and we had a lot of feedback from it about the physical rebuilding of what wasn't there in those early days. And this was actually about rocking, because rocking is, for all animals, it's a very physical kind of communication. And I remember you saying, even with, adolescent boys, hard as this might be to imagine, but actually getting into a position where you are trusted to do that, does it speak at a very deep kind of physical neural level, or what, Nathan?
It does. It's that positive touch and that rhythm. I mean, I sort of think of it that neurosequential way, those 4 brains from the bottom to the top, and your survival brain down the bottom that sort of deals with your senses, I think the touch. So and then you have the midbrain, that's where the rocking comes in. It's right on top of the brain stem, and it gives you that rhythmic patterning. It sort of lays the foundations for all the good stuff that's going to happen in brain 3 and 4. So in adolescence, you've basically sort of gone back to an infant state in some ways, because, we call it the amygdala hijack, because your frontal cortex kind of shuts for renovations. I think we've talked about that before, Catherine, And so,
But for people who are very, I don't want to say the word broken, but really it's a word to use.
Because there's people that have had horrific. In New Zealand, we have horrific statistics and stuff. Like, let's not hide from that. We abuse our kids, we murder our kids. We have a horrific culture for how we treat our children.
And look, it's not, I've interviewed people coming from the best looking homes externally who were really impacted this way. But if you are trying to do that level of repair, what kind where do you turn, and what kinds of things would be involved?
I would turn to YouTube. I know there's a lot of bullshit on there, but there's I think one of the joys of the way we have media today is that people can reach out and find, so there's so much option. They'll find someone that they connect with, and there's lots of good information out there about how to manage your mental health. Like, I always think I just want to tell the person, you are who you're supposed to be. There was no mistake. You're that old Dr. Seuss quote. You are you. It's there's no one newer than you.
And for others who want to respond differently or do differently, they've recognised an avoidant style or a mix, or an anxious style or a mix thereof. Again, what kinds of things can you do to help that repatterning?
I think by talking it out loud, then you bring on what we call metacognition, which is by using meta language. So if talking about it out loud with your partner, and your partner talks about their attachment style, there's books you can both read that get you into the language of it and stuff, and talking about it just normalises it and gets it into your conscious awareness, and often that's enough to just start changing those patterns. You go, oh, okay, so I'm on anxious attachment style, I fear that long-term intimacy, let's do Thursday night date nights, where I have to, really immerse myself in that intimacy for a long time, and you practice it and you get better at it. I think the key, though, is that communication. You need to talk to someone else about it. Your brain doesn't so much pay much attention to what you think, because you think a million different things a day, but it really pays attention to what comes out of your mouth. So talking about it to someone else is way more powerful than just thinking about it in your head and letting it ruminate. The brain is basically voice activated, so talking to someone else is really crucial, I think.
It's also, if you have the understanding of the partner, and the partner and you both see the way it is, and vice versa, you don't fall into that silence, the old sulky silence.
Yeah. Don't think you're damaged. We're not damaged. We just have an attachment style. It's not,
exactly.
good or bad.
And you want to tweak your reactions a bit. Yeah. A question here, a few come in, thank you, but this one I think we will use. A couple of statements come in as well. This person says, I have 3 kids, 14, 12 and 10. They're articulate, bright, to have been assessed as gifted with high IQs. We have a house where we celebrate trying things, kindness, creativity and science. My kids are so negative. Every school day is awful. Lots of people are annoying. Most food is horrible. And they're so jealous of each other and are very mean when it comes to helping each other around the house. My question is, how can I cope with the endless negativity? Do we get a family counsellor, or do I personally get help to support my emotions?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. It probably reflects lots of parents, because the first thing that hits me is our kids are going into adolescence. So unless what I want to say to her is, don't worry, they get a bit horrible. That's not who they're going to be as adults. That's just adolescence. The stuff that you did in the first 11 years will come back. So you've got the first 3 years to build their brain, you've got to 11 to influence their character and their values, and after that you just have to live with them. So don't make it a difficult adolescence, and don't panic when you look at your 14-year-old and think they're a psychopath, because it's kind of normal. They will come back. Looking at your kid when they're 10 is probably more of an indication of who they'll be as an adult, not in the middle of adolescence, because that's really when that frontal cortex is shut for innovations, and being an adult's all about having that frontal cortex. So that would be my first thing. And then I'd say practice gratitude. She wants her kids to be more positive. I mean, I had the same concern. I actually got all authoritarian with it and said, right, no, you're not allowed to make any negative statements at the table. Anyone who makes a negative statement or put down to anybody else, the first one to do that has to do the dishes. So there was a real consequence for. And I wish I'd thought of that earlier, because there was lots of fighting at the table previously, but I only had that for the last few years of their childhood. But man, it worked really well. No one wanted to do the dishes.
The old bargaining.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, look, many kids do moan and whatever, as you say. It cycles back to where we were, that we're not finished products at any age or stage. True, yeah. And I think the question also made a really good, do I get help to support my emotions? You can't take it on board personally. It's just kids being, quite self-centred and self-focused, which at that age and stage they tend to be. Yeah. But it can impact you. I think that's a really wise insight, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, an age-old problem. The stereotype in the 60s of all the mums being on the mum's little helper, Valium and stuff, because it is a stressful job, and it's constant, and it's and especially on mums, I think it's demanding, and you're not getting a lot of gratitude back when they're that age, and you see them fighting and having the negativity, and you think, oh, where have I gone wrong? But no, kids, you only have to be a good enough parent. You haven't gone wrong. That's just part of being an adolescent.
Nathan, thanks so much, Nathan Wallis. And his new documentary film, Scene, he's part of it. It's going to be released in March, I think. I'm not sure where, but you will track it down, I'm sure.